Welcome to this edition of the Worship Mentor Network podcast. We're here in the office of Holland Davis, Assistant Pastor, Devotional Arts, Teaching Pastor at Ocean Hills Church in San Juan Capistrano. Holland's a songwriter, mentor, teacher, dad, husband, hiker. What else?
Oh, every now and then I like to scuba.
Scuba. Nice. I like it.
Or actually, I haven't quite scubaed yet. I guess it's called snorkeling. I keep thinking it's called scuba diving, but it's actually snorkeling.
Nice. I haven't even, as long as I've been out here, I haven't yet to surf. You ever surfed?
I just started surfing actually, and it's actually a lot of fun. I finally stood up for the first time, and it's pretty wild when you do that. I mean, I'm in my 40s and learning how to surf. That's how wild is that?
Nice. Well, Holland, just a brief intro. Throughout the years, he's had the opportunity to be involved in planting 5 churches: a Calvary Chapel Church, Vineyard, Free Methodist, EV Free, and so he has a wide array of experience in terms of church planting and different streams of worship expression. And he served as the A&R director for Maranatha Music and the general manager for Calvary Chapel Music, as well as the founder of the School of Worship at Costa Mesa Calvary, where he served as Pastor Chuck's worship leader. Holland, thanks for taking the time to hang out.
Thanks for having me.
And be with us. Over the past months, I've asked people to just submit issues that they're dealing with in their worship ministries, and one of the topics submitted or questions that a worship leader asked us to address is getting the simple issue of getting people to engage and actually worship rather than just enjoying music and singing along, which of course is a part of the worship experience, or not even sing at all. That's not engaging worship. What have over your years? What are some ways that you've used to help people engage in worshiping through singing rather than just sitting there and enjoying music?
Well, I think there's a couple issues with that. First of all, for the worship leader, what is your theology? How do you approach the function of worship leader? For most worship leaders that I meet, they look at that function as primarily a musical role, that they're there to facilitate the band, that they're there to facilitate some kind of a musical expression. And what I've discovered, and really one of the challenges came to me when Roxy and I, my wife, we needed to make some extra income because we were short, and we went to our church and said, would you consider helping us out? And they said, well, we don't hire people to do their gifts. Music is a gift. We hire pastors, and we pay for pastors.
Wow.
And so it really drove me to begin to search the scriptures as to really what was the function of a worship leader. And what I've discovered through that is that really the worship leader of the church is a pastoral model. It's a pastoral role. And my role as a worship leader is to pastor the people in the area of worship. And specifically in the area of what I call sung prayer. What we do as congregational, in congregational singing is really we've set our prayers to music, and we're leading the congregation in that area of corporate sung prayer. And so as we're looking to get them involved in that process of praying together through song, first of all, we have to look at how we're approaching that process as leaders, as worship leaders. And so, the first thing I look at is, worship leader, do you look at that process as a prayer process? Does that process begin in prayer for you? Does it continue in prayer? Is your worship regimented by music, or is it molded by the corporate sense of prayer that's happening as you gather in a live environment? I've been in a lot of prayer meetings, and every prayer meeting that I'm in, it's almost as if the prayer next to you that the person's praying begins to shape your prayer. And so as you begin to pray together as a group, your prayers might wander in different areas based on the prayers that people are experiencing together. And so a worship set is something like that in my mind. And so philosophically, I prepare my team to be ready sort of, to kind of go off the list, to go off the page, to be responsive in our in the way that we approach delivering that set of worship music. Sometimes that means something as simple as repeating a phrase over and over again. Sometimes that means singing a song that's never been written before, really as a prayer to the Lord. I mean, that's how the song "Let It Rise" was written. It was a spontaneous song that was written really to the Lord, that the whole group there that was part of that experience sang together, and it was born out of that spontaneous environment. So we work really hard with the teams to get them prepared, both mentally, and also just knowing the songs, so that if there's a song that doesn't fit or doesn't seem appropriate, we can replace it with a song that everyone knows, And so that's just a philosophical approach. The next thing comes in just the pragmatic approach.
Right. I was going to ask you, once you had that change of paradigm, which is huge, by the way, this whole issue of sung prayer and the relationship between prayer and worship, and how in many ways prayer and worship are interchangeable. I mean, when you look at the definition of prayer and what goes on during the musical worship time, it's they're really interchangeable realities. So once you came to have that perspective, how are you able to lead your team to a place where they understood what their job or what they were doing was leading people in sung prayer? And then the next step beyond that is getting the congregation to understand that that's what this time is.
Right. Well, how we begin, again, with the team, that's your first, group of folks that you're needing to influence to bring them on the same page that you're on. And so I do that, my way of of kind of leading in general is very informal. I'm not a very formal person. In fact, I'm probably, administration is not my greatest gift in terms of organization and things like that, although we're able to organize and do a lot of things out of necessity. But I tend to work more relationally with people. So I spend time with people. I spend time getting to know where their relationship with the Lord is, and how I can encourage them to draw near to the Lord. Oftentimes I'll get emails or phone calls and during the week of things that people are going through on the worship team. And I don't, sometimes they'll say, I'm really going through a hard time. I can't really be a part of worship, this week or this weekend, because of the difficulty in my life. Excuse me. And I don't encourage that to happen. I actually encourage them to bring all of that into the worship experience, because that's essentially what we bring to God, is those things that are on our hearts. And then as we're ourselves are being vulnerable before the people, and we're taking those things to God, it gives them a model of how they should be bringing the things that are in their life, before the people or before the Lord. Right. It frees them to be able to, even in the midst of circumstances, offer that sacrifice of praise. So I speak to them informally. On a practical level, we'll rehearse it from time to time. During the sound check, I'll just start playing a song that we've never played together, or I'll just start playing chord progressions, and I'll just start encouraging them just to come and just kind of, in a sense, jam along with me on some specific chord progressions that I have in my head, so that it kind of teaches them to expect the unexpected, and gives them a model of to operate off of. But that also means that I have to spend more time in preparation, because then I need to be prepared. The first thing they're going to do is follow where I go, and so if I'm not prepared, to be in that place of prayer, they're not going to follow me in that. They're not going to follow that example, that model. Then as it translates into the congregation, once they see a team that is really focusing on the Lord, they see a team that's really just, every person is, their eyes are closed or their hands are lifted, or they're demonstrating an attitude of worship, and they're listening to what's going on. That's another actually key issue, is that I really focus on teaching the band how to listen to each other. how to really key in. In fact, when I start hearing mistakes in the band, the first question I ask is, can you hear what's going on? Do you hear what I'm playing? Do you hear what the bass player is playing? Do you hear what the keyboard is playing? And we fix those hearing issues. And for us, the use of in-ear monitors has just been phenomenal in that, because we can all mix how we want to mix. But it's a hearing issue, and because once I hear what you're doing, then I can respond to what you're doing, as opposed to just playing the notes on a page. I tell them, we play from the heart, not from the chart, and that's a real key thing. So that's happening on the platform.
Right.
What we're communicating then to the congregation as they watch this is that when they come in, we set a tone of prayer, both with the music. Once I step on the platform, and from the opening prayer to the closing prayer, I'm not talking to the congregation, I'm talking to the Lord. And so my focus is completely on the Lord, and I'm there to glorify Him, I'm there to magnify Him. Now, there are times when it is appropriate to say something. And we actually have a model of that in Nehemiah chapter 8, when the Word of God was being returned back to the people, and they were hearing the law for the first time in centuries. And it says in verse 9, Nehemiah, who was the governor, Ezra the priest and the scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn nor weep," for all the people wept when they heard the word of the Lord. So they hear the word of the Lord and they start weeping. And Nehemiah sees this and says, wait a minute, this is the wrong response. And so he simply says to them, do not mourn nor weep. And he tells the Levites, quiet the people, tell them, do not mourn nor weep. And that's what they did. They just simply gave a very clear instruction. And so there's times when I'll instruct the people, now is appropriate to clap. Now is appropriate to shout. Now is appropriate to, to be excited about God. Now is not a time to be appropriate. Or now is not a time to clap. Now is not a time to shout. Now is a time to be still and to be silent. And depending on what I sense the Lord is doing in the midst of the people, what I sense the Lord is doing in my own heart, I might, say something to the congregation, but my primary mode of influencing them is through modeling, through demonstrating it to them, and through song selection. Right. Selecting songs that really speak the prayers that are in their heart.
You mentioned an issue that I feel like a lot of worship leaders have a difficulty with, and that is the tension of not dictating to people how they should be worshiping, constantly telling people do this, do that. Because for me, I'm not. That's not always when I'm sitting in the congregation. That's not always what I'm being told to do. Isn't a natural response in terms of what I'm feeling. On the other hand, I think it is honoring to God for us to, as a body, come together and demonstrate our prayers in a certain way. So how do you walk that tension of leading a unified worship expression, yet not always feeling like you're telling people what to do and how to worship God? And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've got a lot of stories in that area because I really love it when people are involved in worship. Right. And every church that I've been to, a couple things to know. First of all, as you're influencing a church, it's about a 2-year process.
Right.
So you're not going to start out today and then next week they're going to be just totally responsive in worship. You need to set a realistic goal in your mind. It's about a 2-year process of influencing and teaching and modeling. But when I was learning to be patient in that way, I remember one time I was leading worship and we had passed out song sheets. It was a new church plant. We didn't have projection or anything like that. And it was a really exciting time of worship, and we were just all into it, but I felt like the people just weren't there. Mm-hmm. And so I used to have this talk that I would, pull out of my pocket every now and then, and it really worked. It was, like this, hasn't Jesus risen from the dead? Isn't your God alive? He's victorious, and we should just really worship him with everything that's within us. And so I pulled this talk out, and I was, is your God dead, or is he alive? No, he's alive, and he's risen, and he's, and we should be just rejoicing and clapping and really getting into this. And so it kind of worked after that. I noticed that there was a little bit more of a responsiveness in the people, and I thought, okay, that worked. Well, the pastor came up to me afterwards, and he said, Holland, we were all with you. I mean, that was a great time. We were excited, but we have song sheets, and it's hard for us to clap and read the song sheets at the same time.
Interesting.
And so here I was looking for something outwardly, but they were expressing it inwardly, but they were inhibited, and so that brought in some challenges for me. One, I work really hard to limit the distractions to the people, whether it's a visual distraction, whether it's an audio distraction, whether it's something as practical as the lyrics, knowing the songs. We focus on making sure that people know the songs. So we don't introduce a high number of new songs constantly. We might introduce songs in short bursts, a little bit at a time, and then give time for those songs to kind of, become part of the prayer life of the people, to where they're singing them even when they're not in church, kind of songs of the season. The other thing is, I'll go through a period of time where I might focus on a particular response that I believe is appropriate for the life of our church at that time. It might be a response of celebration, and so we'll choose songs that allow that kind of expression to happen. We'll sometimes read a scripture. We might even give a teaching, just say, hey, this is the appropriate response. Short, brief, not a sermon, because they're going to hear a sermon.
Right.
But just like, Nehemiah did, hey, now's not a time to weep. Now it's time to do this. And just make it very clear and succinct, but give them a direction to go in, and then leave it alone for a while. Let that kind of settle in and become part of the natural rhythm of the church. Because if you start telling the people what to do, right, then they won't develop their own expression to God. They'll just wait for you to tell them what to do. And that's not what I want as my role. I'm not a cheerleader. I'm not there to cheer them on. I'm not there to lead them in worship in that sense. I'm really there to facilitate, to provide the atmosphere, the environment for the prayers that are in their heart to be released to God through song.
Right. Well, that's an incredible insight in terms of the whole idea of sung prayer, and that our musical worship experience is prayer unto the Lord, corporate prayer unto the Lord. And we're going to address more issues with Holland here, but thank you for being with us on this Mentor Network podcast episode.